So, like I said, thrilled to be here. Realize we're speeding along towards the tail end of our time today, and so will do my best to sort of stay within where we're at, but would definitely welcome any questions either during or after the presentation. So let's dig in. So as we get started, here are some things that I believe in, and I'm inviting you to agree or disagree. So you can think about your reactions to these in your head or in the chat, whatever is more comfortable for you. And as you're thinking through them, I'd invite you to find something that you can take with you today. So first, content can't be conversational until it's inclusive. And conversations are deeper and more meaningful by bringing diverse people and perspectives together. Agree or disagree? Practice makes permanent. Small starts are better than not starting at all, and no single person has all the answers. Learning, unlearning, and course correcting are part of our collective journeys. Agree or disagree? Creating safe spaces where we can all thrive means including Black, Indigenous, people of color, disabled, two-spirit, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, questioning, queer, intersex, asexual, and other sexual identities, and all underrepresented communities. Agree or disagree? And people with privilege are capable of and responsible for changing systems designed to benefit them, so they're designed to benefit everyone. Accessibility is found in inclusion, and it's personal. So let me introduce you to my mom. This is Marlene Patricia Greenwood. And although she would insist that you call her Marty, my mom passed away in 2017 at the age of 72. She was born and raised right here in Winnipeg and grew up with her two brothers over on Dudley Street. My mom wasn't born with a disability. At the age of 35, she started showing symptoms of being shaky, a little unsteady on her feet, and her personality started to change. I would have been about 8 years old. By the time I was 16, I found out that my mom had a rare neurological disease called olivopontocerebellar ataxia, which is a real mouthful, or OPCA. Today, that condition is known as multiple system atrophy cerebellar subtype. Over time, part of her brain started to shrink, and it affected her speech, balance, and coordination, and she had signs of dementia. This picture was taken on July 16th, 2016. My mom was 71 years old. Her disease progressed very slowly and over time resulted in disability. So by the time she was about 49 years old, she needed a cane to walk. And by the time she was 65, she needed a wheelchair full time. She went from needing help getting dressed to requiring assistance with every aspect of her life. My mom loved to laugh, and she had a big heart. She accepted people for who they were and made people feel comfortable around her. My mom was proud. She didn't complain, and she didn't ask for help, or she rarely asked for help. She was very hesitant about accepting it. And as her condition progressed, she didn't want to be a burden to her family. She felt ashamed and embarrassed, and she felt unworthy of having her needs being met, so she stopped asking for what she needed. She felt invisible. I'm sharing my mom's story with you because, as I said earlier, accessibility is personal. And I know that I'm not the only one in this virtual room who knows or loves someone who has a disability. I want you to think about that person in the session today. And as a leader, you can help bring about change. And I want you to become more curious about digital accessibility. Follow that curiosity, and together we can help make the world a more inclusive. The future is inclusive, if you can read my t-shirt, and help everyone feel like they belong. And I also want to invite you to think differently about accessibility. It's not about disability. Inclusive design benefits everyone, and I'll show you why. Accessibility is about people. So the promise of the internet has not been fulfilled for people with disabilities. Digital accessibility is mainly a people thing. It's about shifting mindsets and enabling people. Imagine your life without the internet because you can't access it in a way that works for you. Could you pay your bills? Could you file your taxes? Could you apply for a job? How would you stay in touch with your colleagues, your peers, your family, or your friends? It's a human obligation to all of us to think about how to uplift this. Accessibility is a human right, and it has to be intentional. It has to be something that we all take responsibility for, and it has to be created with people in mind. You can make it personal for you and larger than you because you never know what's going to happen to your friends or family. And you might plan for something to be used in a certain way, but it just might not always play out like that. So start doing it for other people and do it for yourself too. And let's look at a couple of examples from the built environment that you probably encounter every day. So curb cuts are an example of how accessible design benefits everyone. They were originally designed to help people who have disabilities and use wheelchairs, but it turns out they also work really well for non-disabled people with strollers, bikes, grocery carts, skateboards, and even people walking or running. The curb cut effect is now a commonly used phrase to show how things originally designed for disabled people can benefit a much larger group. And in this picture, the red circles show the little ridges on the F and J keyboards of F and J keys of almost every keyboard. I use them all the time. So if you took a typing course in high school like I did, you probably instinctively sort of feel around for the home row to find them so that you can start typing. And if you didn't take a typing course, you might not have the same memories of me of beating typing speed records with a teacher hovering over my shoulder, but I bet they probably come in handy anyway. So they're an example of how tactile design can be used to help people orient themselves, similar to how Braille works with raised dots for people who have low vision or who are blind. So let's start talking about what an accessible digital experience is. Thanks to the pandemic, everyone realized that technology is more critical than ever, and people with disabilities need to be able to participate. An experience is accessible if people can use it how they need to use it in a way that works best for them. Digital is a broad category. So think websites, apps, kiosks, social media, intranets, online forums, and more. And when a digital experience is accessible, it works for everyone. As a technology or a business leader, you might be thinking to yourself that you haven't done anything intentional to exclude people with disabilities. But if you're not doing something intentional to ensure digital experiences are accessible, then you're not doing it because it never happens by accident. We live and work in a people-centered economy, and technology as a force for good can have a positive impact on business and on people. That's the transformative power of accessibility. It forces equality, inclusivity, and it drives communities. But as technology advances, it can create more problems for people with disabilities. So now is the time to get intentional about digital accessibility. And every priority that you set for accessibility improves the user experience. Accessibility and usability go hand in hand. So how big of a problem is it? Well, people with disabilities are the world's largest minority group. And according to the World Health Organization, around the world, 16% of the world's population lives with a disability, and that's 1.3 billion, or 1 in 6 people. In Canada, it's 1 in 5 Canadians, and in Manitoba, more than 234,000 Manitobans over the age of 15, or 1 in 6 Manitobans live with disabilities. Everyone will experience disability at some point in their lives. And as we age, we automatically acquire disability, although we don't always think about it that way. But by the time you're 50, you might notice some changes in your vision. By the time you're 60, you might notice some changes in your hearing. By the time you're 70, your knees might be starting to ache a little bit. And by the time you're 80, you might notice some cognitive differences as well. We're really conditioned in society to see disability as something we can have visual evidence or see. But think about the symbols for accessible parking or accessible bathrooms. It's usually a person in a wheelchair, when in fact, 80% of disabilities are invisible, which means they're not visible from the outside, yet they affect a person's movement, senses, or activities. Over 1 billion people in the world have permanent disabilities. So this diagram from Microsoft Inclusive Design Methodologies shows you different categories and types of disability. So you can see there's a larger number of people with temporary or situational disabilities, including the aging population. So one of the things that I'm inviting you to do is challenge yourself to think more broadly about disability. Challenge your internal definitions of what disability means and what it looks like, and accept that there are many types of disabilities and intersections of disabilities. Remember, this is about people, and people are individuals with their own lived experiences and circumstances. Some of the people in this diagram wouldn't even describe themselves as disabled or experiencing a disability, and yet the experience can be similar. And remember, the earlier stats I shared with you are based on people identifying as having a disability and being willing to disclose that information. But when you look at the types and categories of disability, you instantly recognize that when you take into account temporary and situational disability, how broad and varied it really is. So now let's talk about the web and business impact of accessibility. An inaccessible website makes it harder for visitors with disabilities to buy your products and services, and it bars them from actively engaging with your brand, which can lead to lost sales opportunities for your business. In fact, 75% of people with a disability will take their business elsewhere because of poor accessibility and are even willing to buy from a more expensive e-commerce source that offers an accessible experience. It's estimated that consumer companies with inaccessible websites and digital strategies lose $6.9 billion every year as frustrated disabled consumers take their business to competitors. And people who have disabilities have extended support networks, including their friends, their families, and their caregivers. So by creating a great experience for people with disabilities, you're connecting to larger opportunities. People with disabilities expect to encounter barriers. And this is your chance to surprise and delight in a way that creates lasting impact and empowers individuals to have agency over what they can do independently, sometimes without having to disclose personal or private information just to get the help that they need. So how do some people who have disabilities experience the internet? By using assistive technology. And assistive technology is any device, software, or equipment that helps people with disabilities learn, communicate, or function better. They types of assistive technologies and the way they're used varies from person to person. Some people can't experience the internet without it, and some people don't use it at all. Each person is different, each technology can be different, and the ways people use the same technology can also be entirely different. Some people with disabilities experience the internet with assistive technology that includes using a screen reader. So a screen reader reads aloud websites, web content, social media, or anything else to the user, including navigation, links, images, and website content. Screen readers can be used by people who are blind or who have low vision, people who are neurodiverse, people with repetitive strain injuries, people with cognitive disabilities, or other types of disabilities. And some people who are blind or who have low vision don't use a screen reader, but magnify their screen up to 200 times instead. Some people only use a keyboard to navigate the internet and without the ability to use a mouse. And some people use a specialized mouse or other type of input device. And other types of assistive technology include specialized keyboards, braille devices, or sip and puff devices for people who use power wheelchairs and have limited or no use of their arms and legs. But they can use their mouths to move air pressure through a device by blowing into it or taking a sip of air. So Shaylin has posted something in the chat about how I just want to get a gauge for everybody in the audience of how would you rate your digital accessibility knowledge. So there's options from 1 to 5. Just quickly check. Yeah, it's sitting in a poll as well. So you can either answer the poll or put your answer in chat. But I would love to get a sense of sort of what you're coming in with in terms of your level of knowledge about digital accessibility. And as you're doing that, I'm going to keep going to just sort of save some time in the presentation, but invite you to share that with each other. So what is web accessibility? Well, web accessibility means that websites, tools, and technologies are designed and developed so people with disabilities can use them. And more specifically, so that people can perceive, understand, navigate, and interact with the web and contribute to the web. And so this definition came from the Web Accessibility Initiative, which is part of the World Wide Web Consortium, which is the body that regulates the internet. And how big of a problem is this? Well, so this is a stat that like completely shocks me, just blows me out of the water. So 96.3% of the top million homepages on the internet have accessibility issues, according to a 2023 Web AIM report. So Web Accessibility in Mind is also part of the W3C. And if we do a little backwards math on this, that means that less than 4% of the top million homepages on the internet are accessible. And think about those big brands that are in that category of being the top million homepages in the internet. So it's a big, big problem. And let's talk about Manitoba's accessibility legislation. So the Accessibility for Manitobans Act came into effect in December of 2013. And accessibility is the law in Manitoba. Manitoba is the second province in Canada to adopt accessibility legislation. And the Information and Communication Standard came into effect on May 1st, 2022. It builds on the requirements of Manitoba's Human Rights Code and helps organizations identify, reduce, and remove barriers for website users and members of the public trying to access information or contact them. It applies to all organizations in Manitoba with one or more employees, and it adopts globally recognized web content accessibility guidelines as a minimum requirement. So here are the deadlines with the Information and Communication Standard. The Manitoba government wanted to be the first to apply to comply with the standard by May 1st, 2023. Then public sector organizations, library and educational institutions must comply by May 1st, 2024, and private sector, nonprofit orgs, and small municipalities must comply by May 1st, 2025. Not complying carries financial, legal, and reputational risk. So now that we've talked about legislation, let's come back to the idea that accessibility is about people and taking a human-centered approach. Compliance is table stakes, but when your focus is contained to compliance, it looks at the rules and forgets the people. So the inversion, this is a quote from Haben Girma, who was the first deafblind Harvard Law School graduate, that says, disability is rarely the barrier. It's society that creates those barriers. So this is about listening to human needs and being empathetic. It's design thinking from the inside out and putting people first, including your employees. And when it comes to employees, enabling them to become fully successful creates benefits for the entire business ecosystem. And that includes stakeholders, management, customers, and society as a whole. Accessibility is everyone's job, and the focus is much broader than DEI, and it's not an HR initiative. It has to be a company or a CEO imperative. This diagram represents the web accessibility ecosystem. An accessible user experience happens when content, design, and code are accessible. It's here, and it's also in other places too. It's in product development, in sales, in procurement, in HR, in training, and more. And as a leader, you can create accountability across your organization. It's not the accessibility team's job, it's everyone's job. It's not an afterthought, and it's not a silo. It has to be top down. Often, accessibility can start at the grassroots level when someone is personally passionate, but that person is likely to encounter their own barriers in internal policies and practices. Everybody's rushing to that deadline at the last minute, and that's not a great place for accessibility to live. So once that person leaves, accessibility starts to just disappear, and it isn't sustainable and it doesn't work. So to take accessibility seriously, you need a specialist with deep skill set who can train your internal teams. You can't expect them to pick it up overnight. And unfortunately, most post-secondary education isn't there yet. Centering equity in your products, processes, and business practices is one way to live your values as a human-centered organization, reach your strategic objectives, and do right by your customers. Accessibility is about connecting with the hearts and minds of who you are and what you do. It's a core part of design. Inclusion matters and it creates impact. Accessibility is technology for humanity. People talk about inclusion, and technology, as Kelly said earlier, underpins everything that we do, from how we work to how we live and socialize. And while legislation is a good thing, it's not the most important reason. It's about putting action behind your company's values. And it's about digital equity so that everyone has access to the same experience and information when they want and need it without barriers. Accessible content is a competitive differentiator in today's market. And accessibility has to be intentional. It doesn't happen by accident. If it's not planned, it's not happening. If it doesn't get talked about, it's not a priority. So start by defining what accessible customer journeys look like for customers, employees, partners, and vendors. Start by looking at customer feedback around accessibility and bring people who have disabilities into the conversation. See what people are saying about the accessibility of your products and services. Tie accessibility metrics to overall business metrics. It's not a standalone thing. Doing accessibility earlier in the product lifecycle also saves costs because remediating a product already in use can cost 40 to 50% more. In some cases, it might not even be possible. You know, you might be in a situation where you have to look at remediating something that already exists because of legal or compliance reasons or business mandate, but it's really smarter to make the right choices up front. So nothing about us without us. This work requires humility and empathy, and it requires including people with lived experience and with disabilities in the work so that you can benefit from their experience and insights. Nothing about us without us is the slogan that was adopted by the International Disability Caucus during negotiations surrounding the creation of the International Treaty of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. It signifies the belief that disability rights should not be created without including the voices of persons with disabilities in their representative organizations. And every conversation is different. A lack of understanding or knowing helps you build a degree of empathy. And then once you have that better understanding, an easy way to start is by having someone try using your product or service with a screen reader. Build a culture of accessibility and make accessibility a baseline requirement. Implement inclusive design practices and include people with disabilities in your marketing and audience personas, in your user stories, in your testing scenarios, and in your QA process. Use inclusive language intentionally and design with, not for, people with disabilities. So quickly, let's talk about accessibility and AI. I recognize we're running a little over on time, so I'll just move through the rest of this a little bit more quickly. Generally, I mean, there's no denying that AI has changed the game for people with disabilities when you think about voice recognition software, voice-to-text, face recognition, and more. But with AI, you have to recognize that the machine is not thinking like humans and that machines can be unpredictable. So any forward-leaning business wanting to make sure they're relevant in the future has to bake accessibility in, if only to remain relevant in the AI era, while also accomplishing the goals of making sure that things are accessible to humans. So here's some things. So at this point, you're probably either saying to yourself, okay, I'm in, or you're deep in thought about what this means for your organization. So now what? Well, there's some quick, easy things that you can start paying attention to. I want you to start seeing the unseen and noticing what you're noticing. And since we spend a lot of time on social media, this is a good place to start. So some practical things. Now, in the first bullet, you'll see hashtags with each first letter of each word capitalized. That's what's called camel case. And screen readers will read hashtags as separate words when it's done in this style. It's also easier for everybody else to read. So for a hashtag to be accessible, it needs to have follow that style of initial caps. Watch videos. Next time you watch a video online, see whether there's captions on that video and whether you can keep up with the captions. Turn the sound off and just notice how many videos either don't have captions or if the words move too quickly that you can't actually keep up with the reading pace. Look for text and images, especially small text and images. That can be problematic, and emojis. So When people use emojis to replace words, even though they're very much, I say, the love language of social media, they can complicate things for people with disabilities, because screen readers will read a description that may or may not make sense based on the way that you've used them. Okay, so I'm going to play a video from Apple. It's a short one. It's only 1.5 minutes, but before I play it, I want you to think about who accessible experiences help. Think about your family members or who you might picture in any of these situations. And I just need to do a little switcheroo with Remo so that you can hear the video. All right. Let's just open this link again. Controlar lo que viene natural, con el miedo a fracasar no se puede avanzar. Tiene que ser controlar lo que viene natural, con el miedo a fracasar. Sorry, that was the wrong one. I am just gonna reset this up again. Okay, here we go.
People think that having a disability is a barrier. But that's not the way I see it. You can catch up with friends.
Ready?
You can capture a moment with your family.
One face, small face, focus lock.
And you can start the day bright and early. You can take a trip to somewhere new.
3 miles to the summit.
You can concentrate on every word of a story.
A bird began to sing. Jack opened his eyes.
You can take the long way home. Or edit a film like this one. When technology is designed for everyone, it lets anyone do what they love, including me.
Okay. So now that you're paying attention to accessibility and hopefully feeling curious, here's what you can do. Number one, start with education and awareness. Gain insights, knowledge, and expertise by working with people who have lived experience with disabilities. Number two, enroll staff in training to build their knowledge and skills. And number three, include disabled people in your entire process, from personas to user stories to design requirements, and show them in your marketing and communications materials. So remember my mom, Marty? She loved doing simple things like playing solitaire on the computer or catching up with friends by email. I imagine how she could have felt intentionally counted in instead of accidentally counted out. You are part of the change that can make that happen. Ask people. Oh, and so if you would like to share one thing in the chat that you've learned or you're curious about or you're thinking differently about, I would love to just see you both share that with each other and with me as well. And remember, it's progress over perfection. Remember that small starts are better than not starting at all, and that no single person has all the answers. That learning, unlearning, and course correcting are part of our collective journeys. So I hope this has helped you make business sense of digital accessibility. I also wanted to let you know a couple of things. So first is the social media and website content accessibility class. It's a class that I run a few times a year. Next one is on October 18th and 19th, over 2 half days. And there's a QR code you can take a picture of there with your phone, or you can find more information on my website at squarelyaccessible.com. And the next is the accessibility starter kit. So if you're looking for help in making sure that you're brand assets, from your logos to your social media graphics, brand colors, fonts, everything in between, paired with some one-on-one coaching, either individually or for a team. You can sign up before September 30th, and there's a special pricing option there. Again, information on my website at squarelyaccessible.com. So, or the other thing you could do is subscribe to my newsletter if neither of those seem like a fit right now. Again, at squarelyaccessible.com.